Hey guys, I am the Comics Kid 2099 and I am here today doing a rant video. I don't think I've done one of these in a little while. Maybe it's been more recent than I think. Today I wanted to rant about something that has been bothering me for years about comic books, and I don't really have a name for it. Decompression is the one word snap phrase that is usually associated with what I'm going to be talking about. Basically, what I want to yell about and complain about today is when writers will... Actually, it's not specifically decompression, but decompression is part of it. Decompression, if you don't know, is when someone, and I'm going to name a specific creator, decompression is when Brian Michael Bendis decides that he has a 2 or 3 issue story and he is going to turn it into a 6 to 10 issue story. Age of Ultron, I have not read it, but everyone who I have heard who has read it says that thing was really padded and really spread out. It could have been done in 4 or 5 issues and it was a 10 issue miniseries. And the reason that writers like Brian Michael Bendis do this is because they have limited ideas. Oddly enough, when you are a writer, you have to come up with all of the ideas that you are writing, and sometimes that's not easy. Sometimes you try to come up with ideas and you're just drawing a blank. So if you come up with one idea that could last you 2 months, why not instead make it last you 6 months? And then you don't have to come up with as many ideas. That's the reason they do it. I guarantee you that is the reason they do it. And on the one hand, it works out very well for them. They don't have to do as much work, and they still get paid just as much. On the other hand, it works out really crappily for us, the fans, because when you're paying almost $4 for 22 pages of comic book, and it ends up being 1/6 of an entire story, that is not a good deal for us. Especially when you look back at the 1960s, and people paid 10 cents for a complete story. Once in a blue moon they would get a 2-part story, so they were paying 20 cents for a complete story. We are definitely getting ripped off here. We are the victims in this scenario. And this is part of what I wanted to complain about, but really there's a larger thing here that I will get to in a minute. Brian Michael Bendis is, I will go ahead and say, he is probably the most, air quotes, important writer at Marvel Comics. He has had his hands on just about every major franchise at Marvel. Right now he is working on 2 of the X-Men books. He just got off of, 8 years of working on like 4 different Avengers titles. He's been working on Ultimate Spider-Man for over a decade. He has had his hands on some of the most important franchises at Marvel. And I cannot think of another writer who has, in recent times, had their hands on most of the properties like that, and is still held in such high esteem by editorial and by some of the fans. You don't come across writers like that very often. So I feel like this is the kind of guy, he has a lot of clout. I want to know why someone like Brian Michael Bendis, if he wants to tell a story over the span of 120 pages, why doesn't he just go up to his buddy Axel Alonso and say, hey, instead of doing this story over the course of 8 single issues that are going to come out over the span of 8 months, why don't I just do all 120 pages and we do it as a standalone graphic novel? Now, the answer is probably they get more money the way they do it right now. If you put out an 8-part storyline of Ultimate Spider-Man and people are buying it once a month for 8 months at the comic book shop, then you're still going to make money that way, and eventually you can put that 8-part storyline into a hardcover, into a paperback, and then people will go to Barnes & Noble or Books A Million and they will buy the book there. So basically they're making money in 2 different ways this way, whereas if Brian Michael Bendis said, listen, this is meant to be read as a single story that just happens to be 120 pages long, then they would be making less money if they said, okay, you can put this out as an original graphic novel. but I'm not saying that it is impossible to do. Recently, DC Comics has done a few original graphic novels. They did Superman Earth 1, 2 volumes of that, and they did Batman Earth 1. I know back when the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen comic books were under Wildstorm, which is owned by DC, Alan Moore did an original graphic novel in the form of the Black Dossier. I know Marvel has done a whole bunch of these with their Season 1 books that have been coming out over the last couple of years. So if someone says, well, the reason that Marvel and DC don't do these original graphic novels like that is because of money, okay, fine, but they are doing these things. So that tells me that it is possible that if someone wants to tell 120 pages of story as one complete story, they don't have to be constrained to doing it in the single issues. And that brings me to the second half of my complaint, another writer who is definitely guilty of doing this. Grant Morrison is easily my favorite comic book writer of all time. He has made quite a few missteps over the years. I would definitely say in the last decade he's done less stuff that is noteworthy than he did at the beginning of his career, but anytime he does something, I am always there to check it out, even if it's going to be a disappointment, like his Action Comics Volume 1 that I read about a year ago. So, Grant Morrison, how does he tie into this? Well, back around 2006, 2007, somewhere around that, Grant Morrison did a really long, what he called a mega series for DC Comics called Seven Soldiers. This was a revamp of an old DC Comics team from back in the 1940s called the Seven Soldiers of Victory. What Grant Morrison did, he did 7 4-issue miniseries with 2 1-issue bookends, all as one giant storyline. And a lot of people didn't really read it the way Grant Morrison, air quotes, intended. The problem is when you have 7 4-issue minis and Zatanna is the headline of one of these issues, if I'm going to the comic book shop and I see Zatanna and I see the Manhattan Guardian, I'm probably going to buy the Manhattan Guardian because this is a revamp of a Jack Kirby character from the 40s and the 70s, and I'm probably not going to buy the Zatanna comic book because it has Zatanna in it. But Grant Morrison is over here yelling at the comic book public saying that they're not reading this series in the way that it was, air quotes, intended. And it comes off like it's our fault for not reading it the way he wanted us to read it. And I'm sitting here saying, okay, Morrison, if you wanted us to read this the way you wanted us to read it, why didn't you just put this out as one giant omnibus or put it out in 4 trades? I have 7 Soldiers in 4 trade paperbacks, and the way it is collected is confusing to say the least. This is definitely one of those things where you absolutely 100% have to read every single issue to understand what is going on in every issue. Things that are happening in The Shining Knight, they have an impact on what's going on the Bulleteer comic book. So you definitely have to read all of it. The problem is, Grant Morrison didn't put it out that way. He put it out as 7 4-issue minis. So if I'm going to the comic book shop and I see 4 issues of Clarion the Witch Boy in the back issue bin, I'm not immediately going to know, oh yeah, I need to read the other 6 4-issue minis of the 7 Soldiers mega series to understand the Clarion the Witch Boy mini. Grant Morrison, like Brian Michael Bendis, is a huge figure in comic books. There is absolutely no reason, with all of the clout that Grant Morrison has, that he couldn't go up to DC and say, I want to do a giant 32-issue miniseries featuring 7 protagonists who never meet each other. There is no reason that he could not have done that because he is Grant Morrison. He has done crazy things that make DC lots of money in the past. If you don't believe me, go look at Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on a Serious Earth. That was deemed to be one of the most financially successful graphic novels, period. And Grant Morrison did that, and he made himself filthy rich off of that book. There is absolutely no reason that if Grant Morrison comes and says, I want everyone to jump, DC will not say, how high? Grant Morrison is one of the people who could be changing the comic book industry in a good way. Let's go look at something else that Grant Morrison wrote. This time at Marvel Comics, he wrote about 40-ish issues of New X-Men. This was in the early 2000s. I read in an interview once where someone was talking to Grant Morrison about his new X-Men, and then Morrison mentioned someone else who came up to him and said, "This is really confusing, I don't understand it." And again, Grant Morrison comes off like this person is an idiot for not reading it in its air quote intended manner. This time Morrison said something to the effect of, "These people need to go and buy the 3 Ultimate collections that collect all of the new X-Men run." Okay, fine, fair enough. I have the 3 Ultimate collections that collect all of New X-Men. That's how I own that series. But if that was the way it was intended to be read, then why didn't Grant Morrison just put out 3 gigantic X-Men hardcovers and say, "This is my run on the X-Men, read it this way"? If it was intended to be read that way, why did Grant Morrison put it out as 40 single issues? And part of it is, this is the way the comic book industry looks. Ever since before our grandparents were born, comic books have come out in single issues. So that is how they come out to this day. But you have people like Brian Michael Bendis and Grant Morrison who, regardless of the quality of their stories, I really like some of Grant Morrison's stories and I really hate most of Bendis' stories, regardless of the talent behind these men, they are big, huge creators in the comic book industry. There is no way that these guys could not all get together and say, "We are going to change the face of comic books for the better." That is my rant, basically. I am sure that people are going to listen to this and they're going to say, "What is this guy smoking?" I am not smoking. I just feel like this is something that has been brewing under my skin for a while now. I've been reading quite a few comic books lately, and some of them don't really make a lot of sense because I apparently am not reading them in the air quotes intended manner. So I wanted to make a video out of this. If you agree with me, if you like this video, even if you disagree with me but you think that I have some good points here, then feel free to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And tomorrow I will be back with an entirely different kind of video, most certainly a review of some kind. So I will talk to you guys later. In the meantime, have a great day.